All right, so we're just going to wrap up right now of what we did the last 2 days. Section 1.4 was all about the quadratic equation. Solved by factoring, solved by completing the square, solved by the quadratic formula. On your test, you're going to have problems that specifically tell you how to solve them. Then you're going to have one or two that just says, okay, here we go, solve. So go ahead and change this one right here, this last one, this last example I have. Change this to, what did I change it to last period? 54. All right, change example 4. We'll call that example 4. Here's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So on your test, you'll probably have about 10 questions. I mean, I can't give you really many more than that because some of these questions require a good bit of work. So they're not just, quickly that you can fly by. There'll be a couple questions that tell you, like I said, exactly how I want you to solve, completing the square, factoring, quadratic formula. But then there'll be some that just all the directions say is solve. Now, we are not talking about imaginary right now. We have not just started discussing that. So all I'm talking about right now is solving. Does anybody remember from yesterday what the discriminant tells us? How many solutions, right? What do I know? If the number underneath the radical is positive, how many solutions do I have? 2 real. Good. If the number underneath the radical is 0, 1 real. And if the number underneath the radical is negative? No real, right? No real. What are those called if they're not real? Imaginary. Okay, but we're not worried about that today for this next test. Once we go to section 1.5, then we're not talking about just reals anymore. It's going to be both. But for right now, we're talking about 2 reals, 1 real, no real. So you'll have a question or two that just says, hey, use the discriminant and tell me what types of solutions I have. But if you have a question that just says solve, guys, this is what I really need you to pay attention to. If you guys just said, I'm just going to use the quadratic formula, I don't care, that's what I like to use, and you said A equals 1, B equals 18, and C equals 40. Is that correct?
No.
Why not?
They're not standard form.
You guys have to get your equation into standard form first, because when I move 18n over, and when I move 40 over, what do those two numbers become? Negative. So the first thing you need to do is, okay, let me move this over. So this becomes negative 18n minus 40, and we're solving. So we want to know what x equals 0.
Why can't you move it and put the other side to negative? And you don't want to...
That's fine. You could. I just don't like when my leading coefficient is negative. Yeah. So once we do that, guys, now we have our 3 ways. You can either factor, you can complete the square, or use the quadratic formula. When it says solve, you do what you want. In this situation, you're going to solve by factoring, completing the square, quadratic formula. The first thing I personally would do is see if it factors, because to me, that's the easiest thing. If you wanted to complete the square, because you guys really like that, what do we have to make sure that the first term is in order to complete the square? It needs to be a positive 1. And you also want to make sure that your middle term is divisible by what number? 2. If it was 9, you guys don't want to work with 9 halves. So some of you like completing the square, perfectly fine. Just make sure that first term is a positive 1 and the second term is divisible by 2. But I'm going to check to see if this factors. So I'm going to say A times C. N1 times negative 40 gives me negative 40. What are the factors of negative 40 that could multiply to give me a negative 40, but add to give me negative 18? Positive 2 and negative 20. Very good. So how do I solve this? I set each parenthesis equal to 0. So I get n equals negative 2, and I get n equals 20. Questions? Now, somebody asked me last period, can I solve this? Absolutely, guys. How could you solve it? You can take negative 2, plug it back into the original equation. Plug it in here, plug it in here. Your left-hand side should equal the right-hand side. You can also take 20, plug it in the left-hand side for n, plug it in the right-hand side, and it should equal. Does that make sense? Everybody all right? Okay, let's move along to number 2. I'm not going to give you all problems that are just precious little angels that are super easy, so let's focus. What's the first thing I need to do here? Move. I'm going to move. 9n squared. Negative 18 becomes positive 18n. Then I have plus 79 equals 0. So I'm going to try to factor first. Is there a GCF? Is there a number that goes into 9, 18, and 79? No. Okay, so I can't factor it, right? Well, I mean, I guess I could try. I could do 9 times 79 and get some ridiculous number, right? And then try to find all the factors. Even if it did factor, I don't want to waste my time. So now my two other options are completing the square or quadratic. Now, you guys could complete the square here. If you divided everything by 9, 9 divided by 9 is 1. That gives me n squared, right? 18 divided by 9 is 2. That's fine because that's an even number. But then you would have to move 79 ninths to the other side, and you'd have to use that in calculations. I don't think a lot of us want to do that. So the easiest thing for us to do is to do what? The quadratic formula, okay? So let's go through this. I know the numbers are big. It's okay. A equals 9, B equals 18, and C equals 79. Now, I'm doing this problem for a specific reason because I want you guys to pay attention. I want you to think the whole way you go through these problems. Your quadratic formula is negative B, so it's negative 18 plus or minus B squared minus 4 times A times C divided by 2 times 9, correct? Okay, so now let's just simplify. Negative 18 plus or minus, anybody know what 18 squared is? 324?
Yes.
Okay, and I know this is going to be over 18. Then I have minus. Guys, what's 4 times 9? 36 times 79. So just watch for a second. 79 times 36. Now, you guys don't have a calculator with you on your test, right? So now you guys are like, seriously, Ms. Meadows? Now, before you go and start going 9 times 6 is 54, and then 6 times 7, I don't know, it's too hard. Okay, before you start doing that, guys, think about this for a second. I have 324 minus. Is 79 times 36 going to be bigger than 324? Yes. So what's going to happen underneath here when I get this? It's going to be a negative number, right? Which, how many real solutions do you have when you have a negative underneath your radical? You have no real solutions. So you could just write at this point, no solution. That's why it's important to understand what the discriminant tells you. It tells you right there, oh, geez, I don't even have to go any further because it's a negative number. We're not dealing with negatives underneath the radical right now, so my answer here is no solution. You could stop right there. That's showing me enough work that you understand everything needs to be in standard form. You moved it all where it needed to be. You plugged everything in, and then you realize, wait a second, that number's going to be ginormous. So it's not going to work. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if you don't see that, okay, fine. Just, plug along. All right, I'm changing to X's here because K's starts to look like different numbers for me. So what do I do with 3? I have to subtract. I got to get everything in standard form. So I have 5x squared plus 20x minus 60 equals 0, right? You guys with me? Okay. All right, so Mrs. Meadows, her favorite thing to do is factoring. Well, not really, but the easiest thing. Instead of me just going, okay, I'm just going to try and factor this and say 5 times negative 60. So, geez, negative 300. Does anybody notice anything?
GCF.
Is there one?
Yes.
Yeah. What can I take out of all 3 of these?
5.
I can take out a 5. Guys, watch how things really simplify when you take out the GCF. I have x squared plus 4x minus 12. Are those numbers much easier to work with?
Yeah.
Yes. Those are much easier to work with, yes? All right, so here we go. We're going to factor this. A times C is just negative 12. What are the factors of negative 12 that multiply to give me a negative 12, but add to give me 4? What kind of 6, what kind of 2? Okay, so x plus 6, x minus 2. Now, somebody asked me yesterday or whenever we did completing the square. It was a great question. When you take out the GCF, does it just go away?
No.
In this case it does. When you take out the GCF and there is not a variable attached to it, right? When I set all of these equal to 0, go ahead. What's 5 equals 0? It's never true, right? If I owe you $5 and I give you 0 and I say, we're even, guys. No, right? So that doesn't ever count. Has to have a variable with it.
So like 5x.
Yes. It's got to be 5x squared, something like that. But here I have x minus 6 equals 0. Just kidding, x plus 6. And then x minus 2 equals 0. Yeah.
If it was like 5x, we would just do 5x equals 0.
Which would be 0. Yep.
So like
If it was, let me just finish for one sec. Hang on. So I have x here equals negative 6. And x here equals positive 2, right? So if there was a situation where you guys took out a 5x, okay, we still set that equal to 0. Divide both sides by 5. As long as 0 is in the numerator, everything's okay, right? You would get x equals 0. But that would give us 3 solutions. Does anybody remember how we figure out how many solutions we would have?
Yes.
What's the highest exponent? 2. So I know we only have 2 solutions. So that can be a good thing to remember. When you take out a number and it's a quadratic, you know you're going to have 2 solutions. There probably shouldn't be an x attached to it.
Are you going to give us one with an x attached?
Maybe, to factor it. All right, now this one. I changed it to minus 54, so please make that change. But before I do anything, guys, can I just start factoring or quadratic formula or anything? No, I've got to move everything to one side. So I have 6x squared plus 12x minus 54 equals 0. So what is that thing we always look for to make our life a little bit easier? GCF. Is there a number that goes in all 3 of these? Okay, if I divide out a 6, not a 6x, I'm just taking out a 6. 6 is on the outside, so I'm left with x squared plus 2x minus 9, right? Okay. Those numbers are surely better. So the first thing, just try to factor it. Can you factor? Is there any factors of 9 that'll multiply to give you 9 but add to give you 2? No. All right, so your other 2 options are the quadratic formula, which is perfectly fine. A is 1, B is 2, C is negative 9, or completing the square. In order to complete the square, what does your A term have to be? 1. It is. Good. What does your B term have to be? Divisible by 2. It is. So let's complete the square. Again, on your test, one question is going to say, solve by completing the square, so you have to be able to do it.
So at this point, we just get rid of the 6, right?
Yep. At this point, like Camila said, we just get rid of the 6, right? Because at the end, you're going to say 6 equals 0, which it doesn't, so don't worry about it. God bless. So now if I'm going to complete the square, I have to take my B term and do what to it? Divide by 2. Okay, that tells me everything I need to know. That tells me that in my parenthesis, I have a positive 1, and we have it squared, right? Oh, I skipped some steps, sorry. I need to write it out, yep. I don't usually write it out, but I need to, yep. If we're going to complete the square, I'm sorry, I have x squared plus 2x plus the box, right? When I have negative 9, it moves to the other side, it becomes positive 9, then I have the box, yeah? Okay. Now we can take our B term and divide it by 2. What do I get? 1. So I know my parenthesis is x plus 1. It's plus because it's positive. Squared. Equals, what goes in the box?
1.
1 squared, which is 1. What you add to one side, you add to the? So 9 plus 1 is 10. And now to finish this, we do the same thing we do all the time. We take the square root. When you actually take the square root, guys, what goes in front of your answer? Plus, minus. Good. And then what? Subtract the 1. So you can write your answer 2 ways. Hang on one second. X equals negative 1 plus minus root 10. Or you can say x equals plus minus root 10 minus 1. Just make sure, guys, make sure you have that plus minus. And make sure that minus 1 or plus whatever is, make sure I know it's on the outside of the square root. Yes, ma'am.
Wouldn't it be negative? Wait, maybe I just wrote it wrong. Can you go back up?
Sure. Whatever you put in the box is always, this was a negative 9 here. So So when you moved it over, it became positive. Did you have negative?
Oh, yeah, I just flip it.
Okay, no worries, no worries. All right, does anybody have any questions? No, we're okay? All right.